Hey, Danielle.
Hey, sorry, I was just in an IEP meeting, so
Oh, no worries. We're started. I started letting people in, and we can maybe give it another minute or so.
okay. Do you know you're not on camera? I'm assuming you know that, right?
Oh yeah, I know.
Okay.
Hi,
I,
I just got off a phone call, sorry, and I can introduce everybody once we make sure people are still logging in.
it's okay. I just got out of an IEP meeting, so I'm just hopping on now too.
Yeah, that's all right. We can let a few people in first. Hi, Kristen.
Hey, Mark.
Okay, I think we can get started. It seems pretty steady, and I don't want to take up too much of everyone's time just because I know Danielle's got some stuff to get through today to talk about, and I just realized I need to change my name so that everyone knows who's talking. Um, Welcome everyone to the Ohio Special Education Legal Clinic. I know that I'm seeing some numbers come up still, but I just want to get started anyway. My name is Renee Stronsky and I'm with Abdnour Weiker, and this is the Ohio Special Education Legal Clinic. It is a collaboration between Abdnour Weiker, the Ohio Coalition for the Education of Children with Disabilities, OCECD, and Disability Rights Ohio, DRO. We are midway, I would say, about through our 2024-2025 school year series of workshops. Today is on aid support and related services, discussing legal requirements and practical solutions with Danielle Randolph from Abdnour Weiker. And you can sign up for additional workshops at the website, lawyers4students.com/legal clinic, where you should have signed up today for today as well. And you can also sign up for individual guidance sessions, private 30-minute consultations with different attorneys and volunteers from AW, OCECD, and DRO. And you can do so at that website that I mentioned. This clinic takes place once a month on the third Monday of every month, except for today is on a Tuesday because of the holiday yesterday. At the end of the presentation today, we will have time for any questions about the presentation, as well as any general special education questions that our audience members might have if we have the time. And then we will also have I don't believe that audience members can use the chat function. If you can drop your questions in the chat. Otherwise, you can use the Q&A and drop any questions you have through there. Danielle, do you mind if we pause you throughout the presentation for questions? Okay, so we will be monitoring Mark and I and Kristen will be monitoring the Q&A. If there's anything that we can answer without interrupting Danielle, we'll type it back in there, and otherwise we will pause Danielle and give her the question. She'll answer it for you right away. Closed captioning should also be available, and this is recording and will be posted on our website, the same lawyersforstudents.com/legal clinic within the next few days after this is recorded today. I think that's everything, taking care of housekeeping. So without any further ado, I'll pass it over to Danielle Randolph to introduce herself and talk to us about aid support and related services.
Hey, thanks, Renee. So my name is Danielle. I've been with the firm since 2019, so it's been quite a bit of time. I help families navigate the world of special education. So my role is to support families and their children and ensuring that the children get access to all the special education services that are required for them to receive a free and appropriate public education. My background is in school psychology and special education administration. I've been in this field since 2011, so it's been quite a while. I think I have a pretty vast knowledge of special education. But being where I am today and helping families is really my favorite job I've had, because every day I get to go to sleep knowing I've helped somebody. So today we are going to be talking about aid support and related services, looking at some of the legal requirements and some practical solutions. So we're first going to start with related services. So what are related services? Related services are the supportive services or activities necessary for some students with disabilities to maximize their educational outcomes. They can assist students with disabilities by helping them to participate in the general education curriculum with their peers, to meet their annual educational goals, and to take part in extracurricular and non-academic activities. So related services are really supporting the student in all aspects of the educational environment. So again, in the classroom, outside the classroom, and those extracurricular and non-academic activities. There are many different related service providers, and I do have some here on the screen, but this is not an exhaustive list. And it does depend on which state you're in on what would be considered a related service. But here in the state of Ohio, here are some that we typically see on IEPs. So we have the adaptive physical education teacher, audiologist, occupational therapist, physical therapist, orientation and mobility specialist, a speech and language pathologist, school psychological services, mental health provider, counselor, interpreters, and paraprofessionals. We're going to talk a bit more about paraprofessionals specifically later on in the presentation. And again, in the state of Ohio, paraprofessionals sometimes are considered related service and sometimes they're not. So we'll touch on that a little bit further. So when we looked at related services on an IEP a little bit more specifically, these are individuals who are qualified to provide a related service in the area of their expertise. So these individuals have some sort of specific training. Again, if we think about a speech and language pathologist, they've gone to school, they've received a degree in education to know how to work with students and developing their speech and language skills. So somebody who is trained in that area, they are licensed. So in the state of Ohio, all these professionals are licensed in their areas. They all hold different certificates, so that way they can practice in the school setting. The IEP team, they're the ones who determine which related services are necessary for the student to succeed in school. And this is based on any current assessments of that child. So that could be an initial evaluation, team report, a reevaluation, or even just specifically looking at that area of need. But it's really the IEP team that determines if that service is necessary for that student to grow and develop. Related services are provided to the child at no cost to the parent. And they can be removed from an IEP without a reevaluation if data supports the removal. This is a bit different than other services on the IEP, but a related service provider, if they have enough data to show that the student has progressed, met their goals, no longer requires this service, then the IEP team can remove that service from the IEP without actually reevaluating the student. So again, a bit unique. Related service providers can either work on their own separate goal, they can support a goal or goals that another provider is working on, or they can assist with modifications and accommodations for the child. A related service provider is there for the student, but also the team. So we see a lot of times that person will, again, work with the child's team, with the teaching staff to ensure that the student's being serviced appropriately in the classroom when that provider is not there. They also support parents and they connect the family with outside resources. I know a lot of related service providers who are connected with our educational service centers or state support teams, or even just local community resources. And they usually are a good person to go to for parents and for families if they need some connection to those outside resources.
Hey, Danielle.
Yeah.
We do have a good question in the chat box.
Okay.
Go back a slide too.
Sure.
It says that fourth bullet point is new to me. I always thought for related services to discontinue, there had to be evidence in the ETR.
Yeah, so and this was new to me a couple years ago as well, because I thought, to add a related service, we have to have an assessment showing the need, and to remove it, you would think it'd be the same way, but it's not. And there is information from the federal and state government that says this is an okay practice. So if a speech and language pathologist comes to the table and they say, this student has met my goals, I see no further need for them to work with me, they can be removed from the IEP because they are a related service. Again, an intervention specialist could not be removed because they are the primary service provider, and that evaluation did require their support. But related services are more of an ancillary support to that student, and they can be removed. So there is guidance that supports this.
That's very helpful. Thank you.
Yep. Okay, so legal requirements for related services. So the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA, says that related services and supplementary aids and services shall be provided to enable the child to advance appropriately toward attaining their annual goals, be involved in and make progress in the general education curriculum, and participate in those extracurricular and other non-academic activities. So it's a big statement, but it just says that, hey, we need to be providing related services to students who need them so they can, again, grow and meet their potential in the school setting. Although the goal is to provide related services to the greatest extent possible in the least restrictive environment, service delivery is on a continuum. And this means that related services can be offered on a consultative basis, pushed into the general education classroom, or in a separate setting where the student is pulled out. So when we, I don't know what our audience is, but if you have seen an IEP, you know that sometimes that related service provider is listed under the related service section, and they, again, may have a goal or be tied to a goal and have minutes that they're servicing that child, but they could also be under support for school personnel if they're just there as a consultative service to the school team, to the teachers, to the education staff. So it just depends on what service they're providing. I also work in Michigan as well as Ohio, and I see that the consultative basis is really heavily heavily apparent. That's not the phrasing, but we see it a lot in Michigan on IEPs, that even as speech and language pathologists, mental health specialists, OTs, they are more on a consultative basis than a direct service provider. But again, it depends on the need of that child. So just like every aspect of the IEP, the related services are also individualized and they should be adjusted. So if you have a student or a child who is receiving consultative services, so that means the provider is not maybe directly servicing that child, but they're supporting that child in the school setting, in the classroom, and maybe that's not enough and that child is still really struggling, then the team should come back together and talk about if we need direct services for that child. Additionally, related service personnel, they are not limited to just supporting children with disabilities. They can also provide interventions through the multi-tiered system of supports, or MTSS. And again, this is in the legal regulations that a related service provider can provide interventions. Do we see it in practice? No, not very often, because we know those related service providers are spread pretty thin, and they have high caseloads just like everybody else in the school setting. But that doesn't mean that they should be prevented from providing interventions. And I've known some good providers that do. They'll pull a kid in for a group. Maybe they have an existing group, and so they will pull that child in for a group. I know some providers that go and they provide tier 1 interventions for a whole classroom. Maybe we know some kindergartners that are really struggling with fine motor skills, and so that OT will go in and support the whole class as more of a tier 1 or broad-based intervention. So they shouldn't be limited to just supporting children with disabilities. And again, the law supports that.
Danielle, we have a question from the audience.
Sure.
I sometimes see a mental health counselor who meets regularly with a student, not mentioned at all in Section 7, but is listed on the front page box. Would this be related to its funding source?
I can't say I've seen that in practice. And I would question why that would be, because if you have a person that's under the related service section of the IEP, the school gets reimbursed for those services, whether that's through the Medicaid school billing program or again, just through, the special ed funds that the school district gets. If it's not under related service and they can't necessarily bill for that service, that would surprise me. They would put it on the front cover and not include it in section 7 of the IEP. Unless it's more of a trial basis, perhaps. Maybe they're trialing this service to see if the child would benefit from it. But I can't think of any motivation from the school standpoint on why they would put it on the front cover and not section 7. And I would say if the data is showing that this is benefiting the child and the child really needs this service, I would push to have it under section 7 to ensure that it doesn't go away, right? If it's on the front cover, it might be easily removed if that provider can no longer service the child. But in section 7, it's much more difficult to remove. Again, you can't remove a related service, as I just said a couple of slides ago, but it is a little bit more difficult because you would need data to show the removal is appropriate. So that was a long-winded way of saying I haven't seen that, not sure why they're doing it, and I would probably push to have them put it under section 7.
Thank you, Danielle.
You're welcome. Was there a follow-up to that? Or is that clear? Okay.
No, but there's another question. Not a follow-up
Yeah.
from a different person. Maybe what if the school doesn't have a specific provider on staff, like mental health?
I mean, IDA would say it doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter if the school district doesn't have the personnel. If the IEP team or the evaluation team determines that this is a necessary service for that child to be successful, then the district needs to provide it. If, let's say the school district agreed the child qualifies for mental health support, it was written on the IEP, and then that person left, then that child would be entitled to compensatory education, which is really owed time. So if that student sees that provider 30 minutes a week, so 120 minutes a month, and they missed out on that service because there wasn't someone to service that IEP, then they would be owed that time. The school district can't say, sorry, we don't have anybody, so your child's no longer going to receive this service. They're legally bound to provide that, especially if it's on the IEP. So if that's happened in your situation, then I would certainly ask the district to provide that compensatory education to make up for that time that wasn't provided by that person.
And I think we have another follow-up to that. What if they tell you that, and I agree with your answer, by the way, if you wanted to hear the validation, but you already.
Thanks, Renee.
What if they tell you that you can't have the school services because of the billing, because you have outside services?
And we're still talking about mental health. Those are two separate things. I mean, again, under IDEA, if the team determines that the child requires this related service to be successful in the school setting, then that district needs to provide that service. If the parent opts to get outside services, fantastic, but that should not preclude or prevent the child from receiving that in the school setting. Those are two different things.
I agree. And there's one more, we're really stopping you halfway here, but I know you said that. Okay, but the next question is, how does one receive the owed time? Going back to that compensatory education. This family was informed that the service provider was no longer receiving funding, so they pulled out and there was no replacement. So I think it sounds like they were in that situation where there was funding, that the staff member left and there was no replacement. So now they want to ask how they're receiving that compensatory education.
So if you believe your child is owed any sort of special education services, then you would, again, verbally make that request, put it in writing as well. And if you're not getting anywhere, then you can easily file a state complaint. The state complaint process is pretty user-friendly. They have a fillable form you can find online, and you submit it, and they have 60 days to investigate that. I think in Ohio, we have pretty good success with getting comp ed for kids who are owed that time. Again, if it's on the IEP and you can show the child, that the team agreed the child required this service, and you can show that they haven't received it, to me, that's a pretty easy slam dunk in getting that comp ed. Again, make the request in writing and verbally, and if you get nowhere, then I would say you might need to file a state complaint to have the state come in and say, yeah, district, you need to provide that service.
Thank you, Danielle. That's all for now.
Okay, great. So we are moving on to, oh, whoopsies. I apologize. Did I go back or I went back? Okay. So related services and 504s. This is sort of a, I don't know, a sticky topic, if you will. When I worked in the school setting, I was a big advocate for adding related services on a 504 if a student needed it. And I can tell you that my superintendent did not appreciate that. But in some cases, a student who has a disability, they may not require a special design instruction and not qualify as a student under IDEA, but they may still qualify under Section 504 if that disability limits their ability to learn or carry out any other major life activity. And a student may receive related aids and services under Section 504 if they require those services to receive a FAPE. And that includes any related aids and services designed to meet the individual student's needs to the same extent as the needs of the students without disabilities are met, which is a weird way, I guess, of saying, equal access. So if a student under Section 504, if they have a plan and on that plan are different aids and services or accommodations so they can have equal access to the curriculum in the gen ed classroom, then that includes, again, those related services. They're not explicitly defined in Section 504, related services aren't. However, OCR, which is the Office of Civil Rights, they have indicated that related services refer to developmental, corrective, and other supportive services that should be on an IEP, or on an IEP, I apologize, on a 504 plan if the student requires it. Now, districts don't like putting on a 504 plan because they don't get funding. They don't get any sort of reimbursement for those services. And so they don't necessarily want to do that because, again, we know related service providers are spread pretty thin. They're servicing a lot of kids in the school setting. And if we have them service a student under Section 504, that takes a space on their caseload. But just so everyone on this training knows that you can't ask for this. And again, OCR would say, yeah, it needs to be on the 504 plan if the student requires it to access that general education curriculum in that setting. Okay, so we're going to go a little bit more into aid support. So like I had said in that one slide, a paraprofessional or an educational assistant, educational aide, they are considered a related service. It's kind of gray and where that person is included in the IEP. So we'll talk about that. But this is, I don't know, an issue that we deal with often is really aid support for students. So we really wanted to take some time to talk specifically about this. So we usually see two different aides in the school setting. One is a classroom aide and the other is a one-on-one aide. So a classroom aide is an educational assistant who works under a classroom teacher and helps out the entire classroom. A lot of times we see them in the preschool setting. They may be in just the classroom in general. They may be in a gen ed classroom to support students who have special needs so they can access that curriculum. But again, they kind of work around the school building and they're where they are because they're needed. A one-on-one aide is a bit different. That's a dedicated assistant who works directly with a student who requires a high level of support. Now, they could be one and the same. You could have an aide who maybe some part of the day works in a classroom or works in the lunchroom, but then other part of the day they are a one-on-one assistant for a particular child. Both types of aides carry the same license, which is an educational paraprofessional license in the state of Ohio. And they have to work underneath an educator. So usually they'll work underneath an intervention specialist. Even just a principal is considered a supervisor for a paraprofessional, but they can't be, they can't run their own class. They can, no, in the guidelines, it does say that a paraprofessional can supervise a class if the classroom teacher has to step away, but they can't teach, they can't be on an IEP as a direct service provider. They are more of a support person. So where are they on the IEP? So classroom aides are typically listed under the support for school personnel, which is again, Section 7 of the IEP, because their duty is to support the classroom teacher. So as that term says, support for school personnel, they're supporting the teacher. This individual can support any student who needs additional assistance and is not devoted to one particular student. So like I gave the example before, we see them usually in the general education classroom supporting students who have special needs or supporting all kids. I know a lot of schools have them at the pre-K, kindergarten level, just because there's a high level of need with some extra hands. But again, we also see some students being pushed into a general education class, maybe an inclusion class, and you might have aid support in those types of settings to support that group of kids who are in there. Now, this is sort of my opinion, but also I think there is some legal backing to this, that the one-on-one aid should be listed under related service or accommodations, because the responsibility is to assist that one student. So a related service is, again, an individualized support for that student, so that way they can access the, again, the school environment, make progress on their goals, receive a FAPE, and a one-on-one aid is there to ensure that that occurs. Some districts put it under accommodations because it is, again, student-centered, student-focused, and it's something they require to, again, make progress and access that gen ed setting. So either one of those is okay. What I don't like, I don't like when they put a one-on-one aid under support for school personnel, because, again, to me, that's not the place for that, because that individual is not supporting the teacher necessarily, they're supporting the student. I really was trying, I was trying to find some terminology to back up my thought process here, and I was not all that successful, except for in Ohio guidelines, a paraprofessional is listed under related services. So I feel decently validated. I don't know, Renee, Kristen, Mark, if you feel the same way as me, but I just think that if a one-on-one aid is on the IEP to support that particular student, it should not be under support for school personnel. It should be under related services or accommodations to ensure that that one-on-one aid is always there for that student.
I agree, because I agree with you. I don't know. I mean, I think the paraprofessional part of it makes sense, but just thinking about, support for school personnel, that can change based on who the teacher is per year. If they go from 3rd grade to 4th grade, well, maybe they're in a new classroom where, there's more teachers or aides in there. Whereas if it's under a related, so I'm just saying that under that, it's more variable. Whereas if it's under that, related service, then it's got to stick with them grade to grade as, one way of looking at it. And I do have a question too from, if the district placed a child in a behavior school, and the team agreed that a one-on-one was still needed, and it's been many months and the home district says they still can't find anyone, what would be the next step here?
That's tricky. I would hope that they would be able to contract with an outside agency to supply a one-on-one. I mean, the district's the one paying for that service, but I would hope that through that private provider or through the ESC, or even just, they have sort of, I don't know, substitute educator platforms. I would hope that there'd be somewhere that this district could find an aid. I would be worried that they're saying they can't find anyone just because they're not working very hard to find someone. But I have had that. I've had districts who will post, and I see the post to hire an aide, and they still don't get anybody. And the goal would be to find somebody maybe internally they can shift around so that student has an aide. It's more difficult in that situation because that student is at a private school, and so the district may not have eyes on that student. But I don't know. That is honestly pretty tricky, and that paraprofessional doesn't have minutes they're servicing necessarily, so there really wouldn't be commensurate education owed time. I don't know. Renee, do you have?
Yeah, I think, it depends, because I think at the end of the day, if this was going to court or, even an investigation through a state complaint, they want to see that that because of, the violation, which could be not providing an aid, that there was some resulting inability to provide the student with a FAPE. So I think, if because there's no one-on-one aid and the child isn't able to, make progress on their goals, then perhaps that's something that you can utilize to say that they need compensatory education. But I do see a lot of times with state complaints, the school can make a violation or has made some sort of violation, but as long as and procedurally, but as long as the child still is receiving a free appropriate public education, which under the Andrew F. Supreme Court standard is that they're making progress, adequate progress toward their goals, then they're not really going to provide that compensatory education. So it depends, and it's case by case. And this is something that, if you wanted to, if you're not already scheduled for a individual guidance session, then I would encourage you to sign up for an individual guidance session so that we can get some more information and be able to answer that a little bit more accurately for you. And we've
Great
got,
advice, Renee.
what was that? Sorry.
That was great advice.
And then we've got some more questions coming in if now's okay for a good temper
Absolutely.
pause.
If it's
Just,
okay with you,
oh.
Danielle and Renee, yeah, let's save some of these towards the end, just so we know that Danielle can make it through her presentation. And,
Okay.
I'm
yeah.
good. I'm good. I'll just say this wasn't a huge lengthy presentation because I
Okay.
was hoping we'd get some questions. So we have 30 more minutes. We're good on time.
Okay, good. Well,
Okay.
I'll go ahead and read the first one then.
Sure.
First, a comment. All of the districts I work with use support for school personnel in regards to the aid. Are they being told this by the ESC, if you know the answer to that?
Yes, I did see a PowerPoint. Actually, I think it was a state support team. I saw a PowerPoint from a state support team that said to put under school or support for school personnel. I do think there's differing, which we find that with a lot of times in all special ed guidance from our state, is that it does differ on who's giving out that guidance. But again, I go back to the Ohio regulations that put paraprofessionals under related services, and that's really what I'm going back to. I think a lot of schools put it under support for school personnel because they know then that they can flex that person and it's not dedicated to that individual student. That might be me being cynical, but I do think it's more of a way for school districts to not dedicate an aid to a child.
Got it. All right, next question. We have students who are placed in specialized programming, like a cross-cat classroom. If these programs have classroom aids built into the classroom as part of the programming, should this still be documented in the IEP under support for school personnel or elsewhere, I guess?
And I find that a lot of times it is, especially if those students are traveling to other locations in the school. Maybe they're doing gen ed specials or going into a gen ed class and that aid is going with them. Then yes, I would say that should be under support for school personnel in the IEP.
All right, next. If the one-to-one aid is listed under accommodations, does that translate to extracurriculars?
Yes, it should, but I always ask to have if it's something that's specific to extracurriculars, I always ask for it to be listed. I think it's section 9, if I recall, section 9 of the IEP. I always ask for it to specifically state what that child needs. So I have a student right now that requires a one-on-one aid to participate. She does orchestra, she does choir, and she's also in theater. And so the one-on-one aid goes with her to those different settings to ensure that she gets there and that she knows what she's doing, and then supporting her removal too, because she does get overwhelmed by sensory things. So I make sure it's in there. I also have another student who plays a sport, and we have an aide that is with that individual while they're playing that sport, again, to ensure that student can be easily removed to a safe location if they become overwhelmed. So anytime, in my opinion, if that aid is needed for an extracurricular, I want it to also be written into the section 9. That way, anybody who looks at the IEP knows exactly why that aid is needed for those different settings.
Great. And next one, I'm glad to type a more lengthy answer to this if we need to, but the question is, what is adequate progress?
Yeah. It's kind of gray, but it's better than minimal progress, which was what the courts had said before Andrew F. I guess when I look at progress reports and I look at a student making progress, I certainly want to see adequate progress, meaning that over the life of that IEP, when those goals have been tracked, that we're seeing an increase in skills, and an increase in skills mean they're really getting toward meeting that goal. If let's say our goal is 90% and we're at maybe 10, then 20, then 30%, to me, that's not really adequate progress, because the gap between where they are and where that goal was is pretty wide. And obviously, if the IEP team thought 90% was a good goal to reach, getting up to 30 is not adequate progress, even though they made small little gains. It's, again, very gray. there isn't anything that says, this percentage or this amount of gap or this number is what we're looking for. It's really just consistent growth, in my opinion, that's getting very close to reaching that goal, because the courts wouldn't say, at least what I have found, that not meeting the goal is a violation. If they get pretty darn close, they made adequate progress, and the courts are pretty happy. So that's at least my take on when I look at progress for a student. Would you agree, Mark?
Yeah, I think it depends on the goal too, obviously, how specific it's written. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, last one we have in the queue. And this one is if an RBT, so registered behavior technician, is contracted to support a student one-to-one and carry out a BIP, behavior intervention plan, should it also be under accommodations or related services?
I'm going to come back to that. I have a slide that includes RBTs.
Perfect.
So I'll come back to that.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, so, oh goodness gracious, I keep trying to move my picture and it keeps wanting to switch. Okay, so IDEA requires that children with disabilities be educated in the least restrictive environment to the maximum extent that is appropriate. And the term of
Okay, we had a freeze with Danielle. If someone can anyone indicate whether you can hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay. And Danielle is frozen for you?
Yeah, Danielle's picture is frozen on my screen.
Okay, let's give her a minute here. Oops.
There she is.
hear
We
me
lost
now?
you for a second. I think we still have everybody else. We lost you for a second, Danielle.
I know, which was weird because I could hear you, but then it logged me out for some reason. So
I just can't see your PowerPoint at this point.
I'm gonna share it. Yep, just give me a sec. It completely shut me down for some reason, which is weird.
Yeah. That's all right. We got you back.
Yep. Okay, here's where I was. So I didn't get very far.
Yep.
Okay. And let me move my box. Okay, so IGA requires that children with disabilities be educated in the least restrictive environment to the maximum extent that is appropriate. And the term appropriate is really dependent on the child, their individual needs, strengths and weaknesses. But the goal is really for that child to be with their non-disabled peers as much as they can. The use of supplementary aids and services is sometimes necessary for a student to remain in the least restrictive environment and benefit from their education. And paraprofessionals are considered a supplementary aid and support. Further, IDA requires that students receive a FAPE and make meaningful progress on their IEP goals. And if a student's disability limits their ability to make progress, an aid may be necessary to support the child's skill development. So that's sort of the legalese about aid support. So we're going to talk about some practical solutions because, again, all of this is well and good, but as we've talked about so far, school districts do different things. They write it different ways in an IEP. So here are some things, at least that I have seen in practice, that I thought might be helpful to share. So what should you do if you believe your child needs the support of an aide? I get this a lot. Parents do feel that kids need aides when they're not doing well in school or when they have some pretty significant behavior difficulties, and that parent really wants that extra person to ensure the child is doing well and is safe and making gains. And so decisions are based on data. So this is what I always say to the clients that I work with, is we need data to show the support to support the need for an aide. The data should show that the child is not succeeding without the addition of that support person. Sometimes it might make sense to try a classroom aide first instead of a one-on-one aide. So sometimes, especially if it's early in the year, maybe we can move a student into a more inclusion setting where there's already an existing aide, or someone had said in a cross-cat room where there is additional aide support, or maybe we can utilize a classroom aide that's located somewhere else to push and support that child. But if that's not working, right, then we can always ask for that more individualized one-on-one support of an aide. Sometimes we have to consider other supports that might be beneficial to that child and might get us the same goal. You know, if that child is struggling in a gen ed classroom and we think an aide might be helpful, but maybe also we can add some additional accommodations to that IEP to support the child. So always, I guess, seeing the goal that we want and working backwards and how can we achieve that goal. Sometimes it might be with an aide. Other times it may not be necessary. There are some downsides to having a paraprofessional. Sometimes students become over-reliant on that aide. Their independence might diminish, and they may have some limited social opportunities. Sometimes if you have an aide with a child, other children may feel a little standoffish on trying to engage with that child, or that child may really only engage with their aide and not with other kids. And that's what I've seen, at least on why some districts don't want to have a one-on-one aide with a child, because they do see this downside of having that person with that child. I've seen a lot too over the years of districts changing up the paraprofessionals. You know, back when I was in district, which was quite a while ago, we used to always have, you know, the same person with the child because it created consistency. But over time, we do see, again, some downsides to having that one person, especially if the rapport isn't great with the child and that one person. So a lot of times now, at least what I've seen across districts, is they really are rotating staff members to allow that child to get used to how, you know, other people are with them, and having different personalities, mesh with that student. So that's something that we've seen a lot more of, I think, the last few years, is just having that changeover with paraprofessional staff purposefully. And then that RBT question. So RBT/BCBA/ABA. I know I'm lumping those all together, but I think in the past 2 or 3 years, we have heard a lot of parents asking for this type of support in schools. In Michigan, same thing. So it's not just in the state of Ohio, it's across state lines as well. There are some training programs that allow a paraprofessional to get an RBT certificate. So some school districts, what I've seen is they're sending these paraprofessionals to get this extra training so that they can be better versed in behavior supports. So it's the existing paraprofessional, existing staff that are getting this additional certification to bring that back into the school setting. I think it's the Central Ohio ESC is one that does have that certificate program, which is great for us who are in the area. But there are some other organizations as well that are doing this. The IEP team would have to agree that an RBT is necessary to provide that student with the FAPE. So to the question of if a student already has an RBT, already has a BCBA, they're working with outside of school, can that person come to school with them? And over the course of a year or two, I have dug and I've tried to find support or even reasoning behind why school districts say no to this question. And I have not come up with anything substantial. But I can tell you that districts do say no. I do have a student who has an RBT on their IEP. This district contracts with an outside agency that provides the RBT. RBTs work under BCBAs, which are the board certified behavior analyst. So that I should say what RBT is. I guess I didn't write that up, which is a registered behavior technician. So the registered behavior technician works underneath the BCBA. So in this setting that I'm speaking about with the student, the district already has their own BCBA and they oversee this RBT. And this individual does act as an aide. So they were there with this student all day. They're tracking progress. They're making sure that the behavior is sort of under control, under wraps. They're intervening when that student is becoming escalated. So this person is very vital to this child's development, but this is the only child that I have an RBT on an IEP. I have had another district in Michigan that were open to having an outside BCBA come in, but at the end of the day, the team could not verify that it was a necessity. And I know a lot of our clients, they have private pay BCBAs or insurance that's paying for this BCBA. And the question is, well, why can't that individual come into the school? Because that makes the most sense. And districts just say no. So I don't know, Mark, Chris, and Renee, if you have further guidance on why districts are saying no or any pushback we have, that would be great because I haven't been able to find much.
I think it's just resource based. I mean, like it comes back to, funding and resources available, which is difficult, for districts. I think typically that's a response, and if they can get away with a no on occasion, they'll do that. But yeah, and it's just a difficult thing for districts to do.
Yeah, and again, it comes back to data. So if the data is there to show that your child needs this extra level of support, then I think you have a strong argument. A lot of times districts will say that they can provide this resource with their own professionals, their own personnel, instead of having an outside provider come in. And if that's the case, that's great. But I don't know if that's always the case. And I have seen more districts employ their own BCBAs, which I think is a great move because we do have a lot of kids that would benefit from that support. But getting an RBT in the school setting to support your child is just a difficult conversation. The data is going to drive this conversation. It's going to determine the level of need and will be the driving force to the IEP team to agree to put on the IEP. But it's not easy. And I'm not sure why, because I think if a family has an outside resource to bring into the school to support the child, I don't know why schools are so resistant to this. We've seen private schools be more open than public schools. And maybe this tide will change over time, but there still is a lot of resistance.
And Danielle, this is a related question, somewhat personnel related, but this question says, what supports are given to the intervention specialists, the aides, and even the gen ed teachers while working with IEPs and 504s? I have observed, even with my own children, that the staff are burnout, overwhelmed, becoming biased with their support, which ultimately results in poor outcomes for the student. A little bit of a personnel related question, but if you have some comments on that, that's the question.
I think whenever a team is to that point, we need to get outside support. So whether that's going again to the ESC to get an outside support person or another team to come in, sorry, or maybe there's an outside agency that really specifically works with students who have behavior needs or dyslexia or whatever it may be. If the district doesn't have the support of the personnel, or maybe the training needs to be increased, then ask for that. If the child is not benefiting from their education because there's a lack of training or lack of understanding, then it's my opinion the district has a due diligence to then bring in, again, outside support, outside providers. If maybe the staff is not sure why the student's behavior is occurring and they don't have the right training to do a functional behavior assessment, then get an outside provider to come in and do that. I have a district right now that I'm working with, and they have a strong BCBA in the district, but they said, hey, we're kind of at a loss. We're not really sure what to do for the student. So they found an outside person that runs his own business, and they're bringing him in to come and support the team. Sometimes you just need to speak up and say, I think we need somebody else to come in and help support that child.
Yeah, I'll just say too, from the perspective of someone who represents educators, it is burnout for special education teachers and aides is a real thing. I think districts absolutely have to be mindful of the ratios, the caps by law for the number of students. And then of course, with students with behavior issues, the more support you can give your special education teachers, the better. Because not only is it a burnout issue and in terms of the service that's ultimately being provided to the students, but it's a burnout issue, even professional conduct related, in that can these teachers even handle the amount of work they have either in the classroom, or are they resorting to conduct outside the classroom because of all the burnout and the difficulties. I think a lot of times special education teachers, intervention specialists, and aides in particular are, kind of they're relied on a lot by administrators and take a lot of the brunt of parental concerns, and so it can be a lot. So I think it's really important for districts to support those special education professionals as much as they can.
Yeah, and I'll say too, just to remind, all the parents that are here today, you can request an IEP meeting at any point in time, and that's your right as a parent. So if there's ever a time where you feel like you're not being heard or the communication is breaking down or your child's needs are not getting met, then request the IEP meeting to bring everybody back to the table and have an open conversation about your concerns and what's going on and what the school district can do to support your child. I don't think that parents ask for IEP meetings enough, honestly. But that's a great opportunity for you to get your concerns out there and to see what the school can do to help. Okay, so like I said, it's a little bit shorter, but if anyone has additional questions, certainly throw them out there. No, maybe I did such a great job.
I was going to say you answered a lot of questions
did.
while we were going through, and I just want to say, Danielle, that was a really great presentation. Obviously, it evoked a lot of questions from our audience members, and you did a really great job of answering. Oh, and here we go. I was hoping I could filibuster for some time for someone to ask a question. And it worked. So we have a question. Can we ask for paratraining in our IEP?
I would say, yeah. I mean, you can ask for parent training in an IEP. We don't see that enough. But yeah, I would say certainly you could. If you feel like your paraprofessionals need more training, especially in the realm of behavior, and there's a training out there, I would ask the team to provide that to the paraprofessionals and yeah, add it to the IEP.
I agree.
Now, where in the IEP would that go? I guess maybe support for school personnel or an accommodation, maybe. But certainly can go in there to support that staff. And I think about, again, CPI training, the Crisis Prevention Institute. Sometimes we find that school teams don't have that proper training for students that become escalated and, kind of gets a bad rap, I guess, because people think of the physical holds, but there's so much before then that can help with verbal de-escalation tactics. And sometimes we find that teams don't have that proper training and they really do need it to support their students. So you can ask for that to be added as well. If the staff member, maybe it's one intervention specialist or one paraprofessional that really needs that training, or if there's an entire group that needs that training.
Thank you. Let's see. Oh, Mark, I didn't see two of those. I think they were just comments. What about districts who say, and I can answer this or Danielle can, but how about districts that say, quote unquote, we don't provide one-on-one aids for students? Because that's, I was going to say, that's not
legal.
It's not something we haven't heard before. I mean, schools will say that, whether it's, funding or resources, whatever, but kind of what Danielle had said on one of her earlier slides, or either in one of her earlier slides or in response to a question, it's based on an IEP should be written based on the child's individual needs. And if that child needs a one-on-one aid, then there should not be a school policy that says, I mean, first and foremost, there shouldn't be a blatant school policy that just says they don't provide one-to-one aids, because it has to be considered by each individual student. And like Danielle said, if that student needs that, then the school has to, either hire someone, contract out, or find, a school that does provide those services and, place them at that school. And Mark, did you have something to add too?
No, I was just gonna say if that's the information they're giving you, I'd say, please send that to me in an email, which I'm gonna attach to a state complaint.
Yeah.
Danielle, this was excellent. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Yes, and we had some comments just saying, thank you so much for all the info. Thank you so much for all the information. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that's all of them for now. So thank you so much, Danielle, for the informative presentation. Like I said at the beginning, this should be available within the next coming days up on our website, lawyersforstudents.com/legal clinic, where you can sign up for our next conversation. Oh, I think we missed somebody.
Yeah.
Hold on, I might have missed a question.
Yeah, go ahead and type it quick. We may have missed it.
I'm sorry about that. So my kiddo is struggling and I'm trying to get him tested, but I keep getting a PRO1 with a refusal to do an eval. What else can I do? They refuse to see my child.
Okay, repeat it one more time. Sorry.
Yep. My kiddo is struggling. I'm assuming at school, and I'm trying to get him tested, but I keep getting a PRO1 with a refusal to do an
Oh.
evaluation. What else can I do? They've refused to see my child.
Well, I mean, it depends, I guess, on why they're refusing. So school districts can say that they don't suspect a disability and they can issue a prior written notice saying they're not moving forward with an assessment, but I would want to know why. And you as a parent, it sounds like you think your child needs to be assessed and would, really benefit from that, that IEP. So what data do you have, and are you bringing that to the table to show why you think the child needs this evaluation? A school district, they can't use response to intervention as a way to decline an evaluation. A lot of times you see grades being used. I would say that also shouldn't be used as the primary reason to say a child doesn't require an evaluation. But again, legally they can do that. I would push back, and like I stated before, and I think Mark, you had said too, state complaints always there. So if you feel the data you have is really supportive of getting an evaluation done, the school district continues to refuse, and you don't think that their refusal is valid, then issue that state complaint and have the state come in and investigate and see if maybe the school's in the wrong, and they can maybe push the school to then do that evaluation.
One other thing that can come up occasionally, you can do an administrative review, which is just an administrator, typically the superintendent, reviewing the decision. So that can be useful, and I don't give a lot of credence to it, or faith in the process very often. Because generally speaking, the special ed director or coordinator has more information than the superintendent in any case, but it is just another step you could take prior to, filing a state complaint.
Yeah, I have not seen a successful administrative review.
Yeah.
I know it's an option. I don't
Right.
usually recommend it though, because I've never seen one actually turn out any different than the previous conversation.
Yeah. Thanks again, Danielle. That was great.
Yeah, absolutely,
Yes, thank
guys.
you.
Thanks so much. Have a great day.
Thank you. Yep, another thank you in the question and answer. And like I said, lawyersforstudents.com/legal clinic. Thanks for joining us today. Next month will be Monday, March 17th. And the topic is on attendance, truancy, and discipline, what parents need to know. So that should also be another really informative session. And that'll be presented by the Legal Aide of Southeast and Central Ohio, LASCO. And like I said, sign up at that link, and we look forward to seeing you guys next month.
All right.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.